Hello. Can you hear me? Hi, thanks for having me. Where do I see how many people are with us? Live now. Hello, John Love from East Tennessee. You can see and hear me. Ah, the magic of the webcam. Well, for whoever's here, I'm Byron Herrington, and I play trombone in the Santa Fe Symphony. And I have in this room, hi Jackie, various trombones and devices, and we'll just talk a little bit about, um, maybe a bit about how the trombone works. We on brass instruments, we make our sounds by vibrating our lips, and that vibration is transferred to the air that's inside the instrument and then distributed to the outer air, or the sound waves are um, propagated. So because the whole issue these days of blowing and how much air moves and all is very much a big topic of discussion amongst musicians in these times, because you can't play a wind instrument with a face mask on, and so what's happening is so there's that. I'm buzzing my lips, and you learn to buzz at various frequencies to produce exactly the pitch you want. And then the instrument resonates according to what length you're using to to make the tones. So and the amount of air going into the instrument is really not very much, because mostly what you're involved with is setting up a vibration inside that's transferred along. The length of tubing if I were to buzz on the mouthpiece from low to high, sounds very, it's a very continuous sound. When I do that very same thing into the trombone, you hear it stop at various pitches. That's the natural overtone series. The first is an octave, and then a fifth above that, perfect fourth, major third, minor third, slightly shrunk minor third, slightly big whole step, kind of a whole step, until impractical pitches on a large instrument. So that and moving, this one moving part, which we call the slide, you can produce that same series in half steps going down. And we have 7 different general locations, and that's what gives us our selection of notes. All brass instruments work that way. You can see obviously on a trombone that change of tubing length. Other instruments, trumpets, horns, tuba, have various kinds of valves that act like gates and that loop into differently sized lengths of tubing to achieve that same descending half steps so that we get notes. So I don't know, that's just babbling on about that. Any questions so far? Some sample questions. Do I play any other brass instruments? The answer is yes. One of the things coming up this next season in Santa Fe Symphony is Pulse the Planets. And in addition to the usual trombone section, and I'll get to that, I have several trombones here, is an instrument called the tenor tuba, also called the euphonium. So this is an instrument that uses valves, like I was talking about before, to add bits of tubing. So this, without pressing any valves, that series of notes is the same as all the way in on the trombone. And then the next one down, I push down this valve, and it adds this small loop of tubing, taking it down a half step. So then the next one, first valve, you can see here, adds a slightly larger piece of tubing, and then combination 1 and 2, second and third valve. The third valve loop is the longest. And so you can have the same set of things. On Pulse the Planets, which we're doing in February, Valentine's Day, by the way. We love the planets. Features the tenor tuba, for instance, in the Mars movement, the first movement. And of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on, but that's a major thing. And usually what we do, I or maybe one of the other trombonists, we haven't decided who's going to play what, cover the tenor tuba part, and then there's the regular section of 3 trombones, and then a bass tuba that Richard White plays. You know Richard, but that's like a notable feature of the plan. It's unusual that he included this instrument, which is more or less a brass band instrument, is where it's used the most. Brass bands and military bands, concert bands that you see everywhere today. And that's Holst uses it in the planets. Richard Strauss uses it in 2 of his tone poems. In Don Quixote has a really prominent part for this, and then also in Ein Heldenleben, a less prominent part, but kind of plays with the tuba, and it either doubles the horns or plays that little place that's the critics going on. And so that's at least a couple of one of the other instruments that I play. Also, we play often use various sized trombones for the section. Normally, in most of the pieces you'll see us do, I'll be playing what's called a large bore tenor trombone. Often I'll have a extra valve on here to help out with some technical things and all. And oops, looking down my red, green, or Christmas. Laura, it depends on what it is. If it's carne adobada, always red. If it's something else, chicken enchilada or something, I usually go Christmas, but it depends on the restaurant. Anyway, in the trombone, and I'll get to the questions here. So this is a large bore tenor that I use most of the time. So I play this, and then you see Lynn Mosteller playing a second. They'll have a trombone very similar to this, maybe shinier looking. And then Dave, on the third part, or bass trombone part, will be playing what essentially is a very large tenor trombone. You'll notice that the bell of this one is somewhat larger in diameter even than this large bore tenor, and the tubing size is bigger and the mouthpiece is bigger, and so it's more conducive to a broader sound and really resonating well on the lower notes. And so you'll see, so often you'll see 2 tenor trombones and a bass trombone most often. Now, sometimes, for instance, I noticed that next year we are playing Mozart Overture to the Magic Flute on something. I think that's in January. For Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, sometimes on Brahms, we will use a section of alto trombone on the top part. So this is a trombone that is, compared to the tenor, you can see that it's shorter. It's a little hard to see the whole thing. Let me hold them this way. So you can see that this alto is shorter. All the way in, this trombone is pitched in B flat. The alto trombone is pitched in E flat. So on the tenor, and on the alto, E flat, B flat, E flat is where that starts. And so you can hear that on the alto, is a very light, sort of brighter sound that and it's the trombone that they would have used at the time in the orchestras that Mozart was used to in Vienna and Germany, Austria and Germany, and as well as Beethoven and Brahms, and so for a lot of that literature, Schubert, those kind of things, we'll use a section of first part on the alto, and it's usually written in alto clef. Second part on a tenor, with or without an attachment, and then third part either on a larger tenor or just his usual bass trombone. So it depends on the piece. You know, something like Beethoven Fifth, a very famous piece that we wait for 3 entire movements before we even play. So here's what we do during most of Beethoven Fifth. And about 25 minutes later, we come in on the last movement. So that's often the life of a orchestral trombonist. Sometimes you have to wait for amazing amounts of time, and then come in basically cold on things. And so we're a little bit like a fire department. or EMTs or something, and you have to be, you know, ready at an instant's notice to be able to perform, and so that it's really a head game. What I do to keep myself engaged is I listen very actively to what's going on as a listener, and I have, you know, sitting on stage with the orchestra, you know, it's like a great seat because you can hear everything and you're right there in the action. You see the conductor's face and front of body, and you can hear all your colleagues playing. Sometimes it's a little sad that you don't get to play all the time, but you know, luckily I like listening to music, so it's a really great experience. Someone had asked, you know, the other thing I do, you know, in addition to playing trombone in mostly orchestras, but all kinds of, you know, pit work, Broadway shows that come through, you know, tours, and some jazz playing a little bit here and there, not as much as I maybe ought to. I also teach and conduct, and I've always been interested in conducting because it gives me a chance to engage one with music that may, you know, say may have trombone parts already, but it allows me to engage in the music and with musicians in a different way. And I don't know that, you know, sometimes maybe it's an idea that I like to inflict my own you know, view of the music. I mean, it's just like a lot of things about music. It's both exhilarating and terrifying, especially to conduct your colleagues. And luckily, everybody's very, you know, supportive and engaged in what's going on. But also, it allows me to explore pieces of music that I will never get to play, that don't have trombone parts, or and that you know, which is, you know, actually quite a lot of stuff, especially in classic and early romantic repertoire, and I enjoy that engagement with musicians, you know, because it's just another nice musical outlet. Solo literature, you know, I have, you know, will often have things on the stand, you know, some solos. I don't know that I have a favorite piece. I'm working to keep myself occupied during this time of not being able to perform, with you know, a few pieces, Creston Fantasy for trombone. The fantasy is being able to play the thing, but you know, it's coming along well. I'm sensing improvement, and so it kind of keeps me going and interested. Learning a few new jazz tunes and that kind of thing is also what I've been, spending some. I have been spending also a lot of time binge watching shows. So, I solo rep. It's kind of a big gamut. Just depends on what I do. I really like playing in the orchestra most of all. Orchestra, brass ensembles, and various mixed ensembles. I noticed next year, speaking of which, um, we have a concert where we're playing. I saw that we're doing Soldier's Tale, L'Histoire de Soldat, the Stravinsky with dancers. I highlighted it on this sheet. Oh yeah, here we go. February Strata concert, and it's a very wonderful and exciting piece. Favorite trombone solo to play in the orchestra. Sometimes I'm a reluctant soloist. So bolero, of course, is a very famous, the little trombone, which is like the second melody type that comes in as it alternates, comes in on the dominant seventh of the C major chord. That's a very challenging thing. A lot of what I really love in orchestra is the section playing and the sound that a trombone section gets all together. A perfect example of this is Brahms. We're doing the Second Symphony next season, which is one of my very favorites. And the Brahms, being such a high quality composer, writes so brilliantly and so in such a vocal way for the trombones, as he does for all of the instruments. But we get to join in as this choir of voices, three trombones and the tuba in the Second Symphony, to build. And we don't play like a tremendous amount. He really saves the trombones for sort of special occasions. Someone else asked what's some of my favorite rep. I enjoy Mahler. One of my favorite things, and we did it a few years ago with Stephen Smith, Mahler Seventh Symphony, and we've done Mahler 1. I enjoy Mahler 5, Mahler 7, 9, 6. They're all really terrific. And in fact, I think I've played them all. Of course, there are no trombones on Mahler Fourth Symphony, so that's another little sad thing. And Mahler Third, which actually features a big trombone solo, and that's never come up. Wagner, I love Stravinsky. I really like a lot of stuff, and so it's not always the. It's for me. It's sometimes it's these really great trombone parts or section parts that we get to play in pieces, but it's also for me about I don't know, just really terrific pieces for orchestra. I mean, something we did earlier this year with Guillermo was the Copeland Lincoln portrait, which I don't know, I just really enjoy that piece. It's a narrator piece, but it's so beautifully crafted and descriptive, and it's got some nice little solos for the first player to play, and I don't know, and I thought that was a really good performance that we had, the governor narrating. Let's see. Orchestral solo in the orchestra. I think for me it's like I have to love whatever one that I'm playing at the time, and so and that's part of it, because working on things, but to bring some personal aspect and to be more expressive, and you have to find what there is to love about it, and that's always our search as musicians, as performers, to find what there is to love. And it may be a piece sometimes that's not very lovely, and to find what it is about the piece that's compelling and interesting, and to dig into that, because it may not necessarily at first be your own personal preference, but that's what I always try to find is what is the most vivid and compelling way to make my part sound within the texture, or if it's a solo thing, what am I bringing to it? What's the, and there's all, for me, there's always some kind of storytelling involved, whether it's, and it may be just a story I make up in my mind that I'm playing along to help me find a vivid way to do it, and it's at the most successful. That's for me for what works, and I think makes the most interesting statement. And then that's kind of what helps me put everything in perspective. Yeah, tenor tuba, and we're doing planets later. I don't know if I'll wind up playing the part. I've done that. I wind up playing it, so I've probably played planets 10 or 15 times in the 30 years I've been doing it. Composing or arranging, really just, I don't have like a big drive to do that myself. I think I'm just lazy, because composing and arranging too. Arranging I'll do for, if I've got something that's coming up, whether it's for a group of students or something. I've arranged some things for orchestra that we've done here, and they're mostly pop stuff. And but composing takes, I think, a real dedication to what it is you have to say, and the time of working it all out. And I've done a few little tiny projects, but it's nothing I ever even seek out. I enjoy conducting youth concerts. I've been doing the ones with the Philharmonic and before the New Mexico Symphony, gosh, for 25 years. With the orchestras, I got started in conducting with covering tour concerts that maybe the normal assistant conductor couldn't do, and we had the date, and so they knew I was interested and had studied in school. Why did I choose the trombone, or did the trombone choose me? Well, it's a little of both. I lived or went to school in a small town in West Texas, Idalou, Texas, and we had a family farm, a few miles away. And anyway, and my father was a very, pretty good amateur musician. Played the honky-tonk piano and boogie woogie. He was a man of that age. He was in World War II and all, and played fiddle. Actually, my grandfather, his father had, was like a country fiddler, and so didn't read music at all and never had really studied, but very natural, great ear and good memory. And so anyway, we had in fourth grade, we had and I had messed around with piano and not really studied anything, just a few tunes and just experimenting. And we had the tonette class, or which are like a cheaper, if you can imagine, a cheaper version of a recorder. And then in fifth grade, or before fifth grade, we started a band. And so they passed around instruments. I kind of wanted to play clarinet. I like a lot of different instruments, and I actually really enjoy the clarinet. I actually own a clarinet. I'm not going to play it for you, but and they were passing around instruments, and I was kind of a big kid, and blow a note on the trombone, and oh, you should play the trombone. You'll play the trombone. That's what you're doing, And so that's really how I got into the trombone, and kind of fell in love with it. And mostly, because I enjoy playing, and I probably could have been okay on anything. Maybe I would have been a better clarinet player than trombonist. Who knows at this point? But that's what I did, and and wound up enjoying it a lot and playing, and also sing. I was in chorus in high school, and we had a really great choral program. This was in a different town by that point. So that's kind of the story of the the trombone choice, or the trombone choosing me. So, and then branched out and learned other things. Curious trumpet, obviously the euphonium, tenor, tuba, kind of stuff, and all those sorts of things. Another interesting thing that I noticed for us next year, we're doing this Florence Price Symphony No. 1 in E flat, which I've been looking at to maybe. I conduct the community orchestra here in Albuquerque. I've been the music director for 3 years. No, this will be my 3rd year coming, depending on what we do this year. And I was thinking about programming that piece, so we'll do it first, and maybe I'll do it later with them, because it's a very good piece. And there's a good YouTube version of this Florence Price symphony. Very kind of romantic, beautifully. It's really a beautiful piece of music. Where did I go to school? Idalou Elementary, then Port Isabel Junior and Senior High School. Then I graduated from Ada Senior High School in Oklahoma. Then I went to the University of Oklahoma for, mainly music ed, but then I decided to do a trombone performance degree, and wound up just doing a lot of professional playing in the Oklahoma City local, all kinds of stuff, dance jobs, gigs. At the time, there was a very active recording studio. So there are 3 or 4 studios in Oklahoma City at that time that I worked at pretty regularly, and it was a lot of background, either jingles for commercials for local things, but a lot of background tracks for singers and other acts. So if they're recording things, or making a demo album, a lot of gospel kinds of stuff, gospel and Christian singers, would have somebody, whip up a bunch of arrangements for various kinds of groups, and we'd record these tracks, and they would go out. I think it was mostly demo, and then like if people would, and this is back in the 70s, so of course, it's on tape, reel-to-reel tape, and that would be their background. Like if they're doing things and they didn't have a live band, they would do that. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff, and then wound up getting a job here in 1981, playing in an orchestra, and I've been here ever since, playing and teaching. So, yeah. Hi, Dan. All right, good. Anything else? Waiting for other questions. See if I have any messages. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, how am I keeping busy? Um, it's an ongoing thing. I have been managing to practice regularly. Um, Obviously, there's also been a lot of binge watching, various. I have to tell you that one week, maybe towards the end of May, I went totally in the rabbit hole and binge watched The West Wing. um, which is 156 episodes in the space of maybe about 10 days, 11 days. That was bad. I mean, enjoy the show very much, but also I think I was, it hurt my brain a little bit, so I'm trying to be that. And I have some projects around the house, ongoing stuff that I'm puttering away at. And listening, reading, a little bit of this. Try to get out of the house once a day, either to play Pokemon Go or pick up some food somewhere. Favorite piece to conduct? I don't know. There's just so many different things. I don't know that I have a favorite. I just like so many different kinds of music that it would hard to, I think I would like to conduct. I want to conduct one of the Strauss tone poems. I've done Death and Transfiguration with the APO, this really good community orchestra here. I did that 3 or 4 years ago, maybe on one of my audition concerts. And I'd like to do, maybe not necessarily Don Juan, but maybe one of the other ones. I'd have to think about that. I mean, they're all have their own juicy and wonderful things. I want to do Brahms second. Um, with them at some point. A lot of different stuff. I like a lot of music, movie music. John Williams, of course, is a favorite. He's got such great just volume of stuff, and I enjoy the writing for the orchestra. We did with APO. I did like one of the Star Wars suites from the professional editions, and they did a great job with it. A lot of the things conducting, which is interesting, is a lot of these things are pieces I've never conducted before. Sometimes, like these Williams things, I've done, quite a bit, so I knew them more. But it's a real challenge. Luckily, we have lots of rehearsals, and it's just once a week, so I have a lot of time to rethink how I do things and try to find always what's going to work best for the orchestra. I think my thing about conducting, and I get this, I mean, I really kind of enjoy Guillermo's approach to all this, is very, things you can do to help things along in terms of style and approach to the piece and large structures, but also not trying to do everything and help too much, because then people quit listening. So it's a real balance for me of like, and it's mostly about finding just the right couple of things to say that are going to fix a lot of things. So it may be a balance thing that's going to allow people to hear themselves better, or a stylistic choice that's going to make the flow of the piece a lot better. And so it's really, for me, coming up with these things, because the players are going to take care of the notes, and you don't have to like play everything for them. So that, and I don't know why I got, that's, yeah, I mean, that was the conducting kind of stuff, and it's an interesting challenge of working with the people that you have, trying to make the best music you can with whoever is there in front of you every time. And I find for me that if I stick to that, and I don't worry about this thing or this wrong note or whatever happens, then everything is going to go a lot better when you're just thinking about ways to make it better and helpful and vivid musically, and finding the choices that are going to work for the people that are there with you at that moment. And so that's really it. Oh, thanks, Michael Malden. You're very nice. What am I doing? Peter Ulfers is here. My gosh. Spencer Ballard asks, could you offer a brief history of development of the various trombones? So brass instruments started with, at some point people figured out they could make this buzzing sound with their lips, and buzzing into hollowed out animal horns like a ram's horn, the shofar. Um, Talking about and then hollowed out pieces of wood, so like a didgeridoo. Um, I don't have one handy. Um, and then at some point between the wooden things and seashells, conch shells, buzzing into the tapered end, and those resonate kind of interestingly. Um, and so at some point, when metalworking, uh, the Bronze Age or whatever, and they figured out they could make facsimile tapered animal horn things out of metal, and buzz into them, is the beginning, I think, of what we see as brass instruments, the Alp horn, for instance, and so hundreds of years, the earliest examples of trumpets. The word trombone is just means big trumpet in Italian, so it's all the same family. And at some point, somebody started making trumpets, because if before valves or anything or slides, all you had was the overtones that you had, and they would often be pretty long instruments, so that you could play low and then you could sort of play tunes up high. Horn players, at some point after they started curling up the hunting horns, they found that if they could open and close with their hands, they could get more notes. And then someone at some point had the bright idea, and you can find there's a couple of good actually videos of people playing trumpets where they where the whole bell section moves, and so now that you have the beginning of metalworking got to the point where you could have tubes inside of tubes that sealed up well enough that you could change the length of the instrument on the spot. And so that was really the beginning of trombones. And of course now, with the metal work and drawn tubing, we have these slides that are exquisitely smooth. Before, in previous times. And so like there's some instruments that have survived from the 1500s, trombones, and they would make them in various sizes, and it was the first brass instrument that they used a lot, and they were used a lot in church to accompany the singers, and so that's why they made them in various sizes. A lot of times with the sopranos, there maybe be a crumb horn or a soprano trombone sometimes, and then alto trombone to play with the altos, and the writing, for instance, in pieces like Haydn Masses, Mozart Requiem, the alto trombone is usually playing along with the alto singers, the alto voices. Tenor trombone, slightly longer. Bass trombone, which is very long. This is before valves were invented, and so that's where trombonists kind of got their start. So it was church music, also town bands, tower musicians, so they would get up in towers and play stuff at noon, which, to signal the various times of the day, or like if they must have had some music for, like, in case there's a fire or something, I don't know. So that developed, and eventually started getting into other kinds of bands and orchestras. And so the trombone shows up in Haydn and Mozart, oratorios and masses because of the connection to church music. And then Beethoven, by the time he gets to his Fifth Symphony, is the first time for a major composer. There were probably a few others, Sammartini or somebody around the same time, that decided, hey, I'm going to have these three trombones play, but I'm going to save it for the last movement. And so that was kind of a big splash that Beethoven came up with, and just the last movement of the Fifth Symphony. And then, you know, just depending on the composer and what they're looking for, the trombone became more and more, had greater and greater use through, you know, pieces, orchestra pieces, but, you know, in band. Let's see here. So that's like the quickie version of it. The early trombones had much, the bells were not so widely flared as we see now, and same with trumpets and probably horns too. They may be only flared to this much, so not as big, and so it was a much softer sound. I mean, you could play pretty loud and nasty when you needed to, but they blended well with voices, much more than the woodwinds of the time, which were pretty pungent sounding. If you're, you know, talking about 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and so the trombone gained favor, and they were portable, and the pitch was fairly, you know, maybe more reliable than, you know, the organ in various churches. So that's why. Oh, Berlioz' favorite instrument. Yeah, Berlioz is you know, took Beethoven's game to a much higher level. I mean, especially, you know, one of my favorite Berlioz pieces, of course. I mean, I love those overtures, but the Symphonie Fantastique is a great use of the instrument. All Praetorius too, yeah. And I think it really just depends on if you had some players in whatever town that these guys were working in, these early composers happened to have instruments available, and just the happenstance of very interested and capable players, then they would write more things. So you get some of these early things that have very ornate trombone parts. The Gabrieli family, especially Giovanni Gabrieli in Venice, St. Mark's Cathedral, used you know, a lot of trombones and the trumpets of the time. So that's I don't know. And then it sort of caught on off and on, but it's kind of sometimes a very acquired taste, let's say. I don't necessarily always. I like the trombone. Sometimes I love the trombone. I don't like necessarily to sit in front of trombones, which is nice to play the trombone because I'm kind of on the quiet side of it. So, you know, there's a plus and a minus to all of that. So I guess that's another reason to play the trombone is you never have to sit in front of them. Let's see. Why, Peter? Johnny Mock. Looking at all the humans. Javi Corbin. Yeah, so glad I didn't have a didgeridoo handy. I missed that. I should have made something. All right, great. Well, let's see. Anything else? Oh my gosh, it's 4:49. Micah Hood. Micah Hood is one of my trombone heroes. They should make a video game. Micah Hood, trombone hero. Yeah, Michael, that's your project. Trombone hero, like Guitar Hero. I try to play in such a way as it's, well, just depending on the piece of music, that's going to, you know, work for the, you know, the musical needs of the moment and the acoustical needs of whatever room you're in. But let me, something to end up with. A favorite famous trombone solo from someone you might recognize. A little bit of Tommy Dorsey there, one of our great trombone heroes from the past. I don't know why that came to mind, but it's always at the ready. Cool. Well, last call. Thank you all for the good questions. I was a little worried I wouldn't have anything to talk about, but I babbled on about this and that. For the good of the order. All right. Thank you all. Hope to see you again someday en masse. I should have a mask handy, but I have a safe webcam and good filters here. So thank you all. Oh gosh, yeah, live music. I kind of dive in and out of a little bit of depression about moving. Another amateur group I work with is the local shrine band. I've been conducting that group for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, and we actually had a rehearsal last Tuesday, but out in a park, very kind of widely distanced under trees, so like 6:30, but it was actually very pleasant. And we rendered a few tunes. I just played the euphonium, but that's interesting, and it was kind of nice to just sit and play with people again, because doing electronically is just it's a nightmare, I think, because you're dealing with a delay, so you can't play directly with anyone, so you have to record, recording things and putting it all together, and I don't know, it's so hard to make any kind of tuning or blend, and you have to do it all in the editing. So I haven't done any kind of stuff like that. But that's really, I really miss all my colleagues. It's very nice to see all of you, and hopefully we can get to play again at some point, and stay alive and healthy until we can. So yeah, thanks everyone. Take care. See if any last things. I think that's it. All right. For the good of the order. Thank you all. Hope to see you again.